When my father's lawyer told me I'd been completely disinherited, I collapsed into my chair like a marionette with cut strings. Days later, I was standing in my childhood home watching my brother measure for new curtains. That's when I realized family ties are like contracts written in disappearing ink, visible only until someone decides they're inconvenient. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're from. Because trust me, this story twists more than a hurricane-force tornado, and you'll want to be here when justice finally strikes. My name is Amanda Mitchell. Until 3 weeks ago, I was just an ordinary woman with an ordinary life. I taught second grade at Westfield Elementary, lived in a modest apartment with my cat Milo, and called my father every Sunday without fail. Then came that phone call. It was a crisp winter morning. I just poured my coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. An unfamiliar number, but I answered anyway. Mestre Mitchell, this is Edward Toffsen from Toffsen & Associates. I'm your father's attorney. His voice was grave in that practiced way lawyers perfect. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. My hand gripe de counter. Dad had seemed fine at our last Sunday call, though maybe a bit tired. Your father passed away last night. Heart attack. The paramedics said it was quick. The mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the floor. Coffee splashed my ankles, but I barely felt it. Dad was gone? Just like that. Mestre Mitchell, are you there? Yes, I whispered. I'm here. There's another matter we need to discuss. Your father left explicit instructions about his will. I prefer to go over these details in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I remember nodding before realizing he couldn't see me. Of course. I called the school, arranged for a substitute, and somehow managed to shower and dress. My mind was a fog of disbelief. Dad was only 68. He exercised regularly, watched his diet. This wasn't supposed to happen for decades. The drive to Townsend's office passed in a blur. I parked outside the stately brick building where my father had conducted all his legal business for 30 years. A building I'd visited with him countless times growing up, always impressed by the mahogany furniture and the respectful way everyone greeted him. I never imagined I'd be walking in alone for this reason. Script part separator The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile as I entered. Ms. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Townsend is expecting you. Your brother and mother are already here. My brother. Daniel and I weren't exactly close these days. We drifted apart after college, our communications limited to stilted holiday gatherings and the occasional text. And Mom, I thought she was in Arizona visiting her sister. The conference room door felt impossibly heavy as I pushed it open. Mom sat rigid in her chair, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Daniel stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the parking lot. He turned when I entered, offering a nod that fell short of warmth. Amanda. His voice was controlled, distant. Glad you could make it. Before I could respond, Edward Townsend entered, carrying a leather portfolio. He was tall and silver-haired, with a kind of distinguished appearance that inspired confidence. Dad had trusted him completely. Please, everyone, have a seat. He gestured to the chairs around the polished table. Again, my deepest condolences. Henry was not just a client, but a dear friend. I sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how surreal this all felt. Dad should be here, at the head of the table, with his booming laugh and steady presence. As you know, Townsend continued, your father was meticulous about his affairs. He updated his will just 3 months ago. Daniel shifted in his seat. Mom stared at her hands. I'll be direct, Townsend said, opening the portfolio. Henry was quite specific about the distribution of his estate. My throat tightened. Dad had built a successful construction company from nothing, expanding it into real estate development. He wasn't wildly wealthy, but comfortable enough to own a beautiful home, some investment properties, and leave something meaningful behind. To my son, Daniel Henry Mitchell, Townsend read, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home, all business interests in Mitchell Construction and Development, all investment accounts, and personal effects. The room went silent. I blinked, certain de michiar. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely audible. Could you repeat that? Script part separator equals. Townsend looked at me, his expression unreadable. To my son, Daniel Henry Mitchell, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the family home, all business interests in Mitchell Construction and Development, all investment accounts, and personal effects. He cleared his throat before continuing. To my daughter, Amanda Jean Mitchell. He paused, and for a moment hope flickered in my chest. I leave my sincere wishes for her continued success in teaching. That was it. Nothing else. No explanation, no token heirloom, not even my mother's jewelry that Dad had always promised would be mine someday. There must be some mistake, I whispered, my voice catching. Daniel avoided my gaze, suddenly very interested in straightening his tie. I assure you, Ms. Mitchell, there is no mistake. Townsend's voice was professionally detached, but something in his eyes made me pause, a fleeting expression I couldn't quite interpret. Your father was of sound mind when he signed this document 3 months ago. Mom finally spoke, her voice thin. Amanda, honey, I had no idea. I swear it. Did you know about this? I turned to Daniel, heat rising in my cheeks. He shrugged, an infuriatingly casual gesture. Dad and I had discussed the company's future. He felt I was the logical choice to carry on his legacy. His legacy? My voice rose. I'm his daughter. I've never missed a birthday, a holiday. I called him every single Sunday while you were too busy climbing your corporate ladder to even remember Father's Day. Amanda, Mom pleaded. Not here. But rage and grief were colliding inside me, breaking through my shock. 29 years I was his daughter. What changed in the last 3 months that made me worth nothing to him? Townsend shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps this isn't the appropriate time. It's the only time, I interrupted, tears now flowing freely. My father is dead, and apparently, I've been erased from his life. When exactly would be appropriate to discuss that? That's when I noticed it. Townsend's mouth twitched slightly upward. Not quite a smile, but something knowing. Script part separator equals. Daniel stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. Amanda, you're being hysterical. Dad made his decision, and it was his right. You've always been emotional. This is exactly why he trusted me with the business. I stared at my brother, this stranger wearing familiar features. When did you become so cruel? I'm being practical. Someone needs to be. He checked his watch. Edward, is there anything else we need to cover today? I have meetings this afternoon. The casual dismissal of everything, our father's death, my disinheritance, my pain, was like a slap across my face. Actually, Townsend said, there are some papers for you both to sign. Acknowledgement of the will reading. As he slid documents across the table, I noticed something peculiar. The lawyer's expression remained neutral, but his eyes briefly met mine with an intensity that seemed to communicate something beyond professional courtesy. Ms. Mitchell, he said carefully, my office hours extend until 6. Should you have questions about your father's estate, I'm available later today. Privately. Daniel frowned. What questions could she possibly have? The will is clear. Standard procedure, Townsend replied smoothly. Everyone deserves clarity in these matters. I signed the document, my signature a shaky scrawl. Clarity was exactly what I needed, and apparently wouldn't get in this room. Mom touched my arm as we walked out. Amanda, please come home with me. We shouldn't be alone right now. Home. I laughed bitterly. According to that will, I don't have one anymore. Daniel jangled keys in his pocket. Don't be dramatic. I'm not throwing you out onto the street. Take whatever time you need to collect your things from Dad's house. How generous of you, I spat. As we stood in the parking lot, the winter sun casting long shadows, I made my decision. I would return at 5:30. Whatever Townsend was hinting at, I needed to know. I'll see you both at the funeral, I said, turning toward my car. Daniel called after me, Amanda, don't make this harder than it needs to be. But it was already harder than anything I'd ever faced, and something told me it was about to get much worse. Script part separator equals. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with questions. What had happened in those last 3 months of Dad's life? Had I unknowingly offended him? Was Daniel manipulating him somehow? The father I knew would never have cut me out so completely. At precisely 5:30, I returned to Townsend's office. The receptionist had gone home, but the attorney himself opened the door at my knock. Mestre Michu, please come in. His formal demeanor had softened slightly, replaced with something that looked almost like concern. Once seated in his private office, he closed the door and activated a small white noise machine on his desk. What I'm about to share with you walks a fine ethical line, he said, his voice low. But I respected your father tremendously, and I believe his true wishes are not being honored. My heart pounded. What do you mean? Townsend reached into a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope. Henry gave me this 4 months ago, with explicit instructions to give it to you privately if the circumstances of his death seemed unusual. Unusual? It was a heart attack. So the medical examiner says. He slid the envelope across the desk. Your father had concerns about your brother's business dealings. He was investigating some irregularities. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in my father's distinctive script, along with a small key. My dearest Amanda, it began. If you're reading this, my suspicions were correct. Daniel has been embezzling from the company for years. The evidence is in a lockbox at First National, box 447. I plan to confront him, but if something happens to me before I can, trust no one but Edward. The will they'll read to you is a fake. The real one is with the evidence. I love you always, Dad. I looked up, stunned. A fake you? Is that even possible? Townsend nodded grimly. The will we read today wasn't the one I prepared with your father. The signatures looked convincing, but certain legal phrases were wrong. I needed to alert you without tipping off your brother. Are you saying? I could barely form the words. Are you saying Daniel might have killed our father? I'm saying proceed with extreme caution, Ms. Mitchell. The bank opens at 9 tomorrow. I'll meet you there. As I left his office clutching the letter, I realized this wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. It was about justice for my father, and possibly stopping a murderer who happened to be my own brother. Script part separator ===. Sleep was impossible that night. I kept staring at Dad's letter, tracing his handwriting with my fingertips, looking for any hint this might be a mistake. But there was no mistake in those careful words, only a warning from beyond the grave. By morning, I was running on coffee and adrenaline. I arrived at First National 10 minutes early, half expecting to find Daniel somehow there ahead of me. Instead, Townsend waited on a bench outside, looking as composed as ever despite the gravity of our mission. Let me do the talking, he advised as we entered. The bank manager escorted us to the vault area after Townsend presented his credentials. I clutched the key in my pocket, its edges digging into my palm. Box 447 slid from the wall with a metallic scrape. We carried it to a private room, and I held my breath as I inserted the key. Inside was a USB drive, a sealed original will with notary stamps, and a thick folder labeled Mitchell Construction, Unauthorized Transfers. Ms. Mitchell, Townsend said quietly, I recommend we review these materials at my office. We'd barely made it to the parking lot when my phone rang. Daniel. Amanda, where are you? The funeral home needs decisions about the service. I'm handling something important, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll be there soon. What could possibly be more important than Dad's funeral arrangements? I caught Townsend's warning glance and swallowed my anger. Just some paperwork for school. 20 minutes. Make it 10, Daniel snapped before hanging up. As we hurried to our cars, Townsend handed me his business card with an address scribbled on the back. Not my office, he said quietly. A colleague's place. Go there directly. I'll meet you after I make a copy of everything. But the funeral home is a distraction. Your brother is watching you, Ms. Mitchell. Don't let him know what you've found. I nodded, suddenly aware that the game had changed. This wasn't just about an inheritance, it was about survival. Script part separator ===. I took a circuitous route to the address Townsend had given me, checking my rearview mirror at every turn. The modest office building in a commercial district across town seemed deliberately unremarkable. Inside, a woman introduced herself as Patricia Winters, Townsend's trusted colleague. Edward called ahead. "Use this room as long as you need," she said, showing me to a conference space with a computer. My hands trembled as I inserted the USB drive. Folders appeared, financial records, emails, surveillance photos. Dad had been thorough in his investigation. I opened a spreadsheet titled Evidence Summary and felt sick as I read. Daniel had been systematically draining company funds into offshore accounts for nearly 3 years, disguising the transfers as vendor payments to shell companies. The worst revelation came in a folder labeled Motive. Medical records showed my father had been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease 6 months ago, not immediately life-threatening, but serious. There were screenshots of text messages between Daniel and someone named Carson discussing accelerating the timeline and references to untraceable compounds. My phone buzzed repeatedly, Daniel, then Mom, then the funeral home. I silenced it, unable to maintain pretenses while absorbing the horrifying truth. When Townsend arrived an hour later, I was sitting motionless, staring at a photo of Daniel meeting with a man in a parking garage. "That's Carson Reed," Townsend said grimly. "Former pharmaceutical rep with a spotty history. Your father hired a private investigator after finding the first discrepancies. My brother murdered our father for money," I whispered, the words surreal on my tongue. "We have compelling evidence, but we need to be strategic," Townsend cautioned. "Daniel has resources and connections. If he suspects, we know." I picked up the legitimate will with shaking hands. "What does this say?" "Henry left the company to both of you equally, with you as controlling partner. He trusted your judgment over Daniel's ambition." The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father hadn't betrayed me. Daniel had betrayed us both in the most unimaginable way. "We need to go to the police," I insisted. "First, we need protection," Townsend countered. "Daniel thinks you're grieving and ignorant. That's our advantage." My phone buzzed again, Daniel, this time with a text. "Where are you?" "Getting concerned. Need to talk about Dad's house. Coming over tonight." I showed Townsend the message, ice forming in my veins. "He's making his move," Townsend muttered. "We need to act fast. Script part separator ===. He wants me alone at Dad's house," I said, my mouth dry. "He's trying to tie up loose ends." Townsend paced the small conference room. "You can't go. But if you don't, he'll know something's wrong," I finished. Patricia knocked before entering. "I've called Judge Hernandez. He'll issue an emergency injunction freezing all Mitchell assets pending investigation. But it'll take until morning." "Not soon enough," Townsend muttered. I stood, a plan forming. "I'll meet Daniel at the house. Record everything." "Absolutely not," Townsend objected. "Too dangerous. My brother thinks I'm a pushover. The grieving daughter too emotional to function." "I'll use that." "Ms. Mitchell, Amanda, your father wouldn't want you risking your life." "My father," I said firmly, "is counting on me to bring his killer to justice." 3 hours later, I was sitting in Dad's living room, a recording app active on my phone in my pocket, a small camera disguised as a brooch on my sweater, courtesy of Patricia's connections. Townsend and a private investigator were parked down the street, monitoring through the camera feed. When Daniel's BMW pulled into the driveway, I steeled myself. The front door opened, and there he stood, my brother, my father's murderer, smiling like we were about to have a pleasant family chat. "Sorry about earlier," he said smoothly. "Funeral arrangements are stressful." I nodded, affecting a defeated posture. "I'm still trying to understand why Dad changed his will." Daniel settled into Dad's favorite armchair, a deliberate power move. "Sometimes we don't know people as well as we think we do." "That much is true," I murmured. "Look," he leaned forward, all faux compassion, "I'll help you move your things out this weekend. And I can give you a small stipend until you get back on your feet." That's when I saw it, Dad's whiskey glass in Daniel's hand. The same glass Dad used every evening for his one drink. The same drink that, according to the toxicology report I'd found on the USB, had contained trace amounts of a heart-attacking compound the night he died. Script part separator ===. That glass in Daniel's hand triggered something primal in me. "He trusted you," I whispered, my voice barely audible.
What is that?
Daniel took a sip from Dad's whiskey glass, his eyebrows raising slightly.
Dad trusted you.
With the company. With his legacy. I watched him carefully, noting how his shoulders relaxed at my apparent acceptance. It was the right business decision, he replied smoothly. You're better with kids than contracts, Amanda. Always have been. I forced a weak smile. I suppose. It's just, there are so many memories in this house. Daniel glanced around, already mentally redecorating.
Change is inevitable.
Dad understood that better than anyone. When did he tell you about the will changes? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. A few months back. After his checkup.
Daniel swirled ember liquid in the glass.
He realized mortality was catching up with him. His heart condition, I murmured. Daniel's glass paused midway to his lips. You knew about that. He mentioned not feeling well. I shrugged, watching his reaction carefully. I wish he'd told me it was serious. Well, he didn't want to worry you. Daniel set the glass down, suddenly interested in his watch. Listen, I have some people coming to assess the house value tomorrow.
Why don't you take whatever sentimental items you want tonight?
So soon.
Evidently my eyes, playing the shocked sister.
The funeral isn't even until. Business doesn't stop for grief, Amanda. His tone hardened slightly. The company needs leadership. The transition has to be immediate. Like Dad's death, I said quietly. Daniel went very still. What's that supposed to mean? Script part separator ===. Just that it was so sudden. One day he's fine, the next, gone. I let tears fill my eyes, not entirely fabricated. I keep wondering if he suffered.
Daniel's expression flickered between irritation and something darker.
The doctors said it was quick. Clean. Clean, I repeated, leaning forward to pick up Dad's whiskey glass.
Strange word choice.
For a heart attack, I mean. Daniel watched me carefully as I examined the glass. Do you remember when we were kids, I said, turning the glass in my hands, and Dad caught you taking money from Mom's purse? You denied it, even with the evidence right there. Ancient history, Amanda. Daniel stood abruptly. Are you planning to spend the night reminiscing, or shall we discuss which items you'd like to take? I set the glass down carefully. Actually, there are some financial matters I wanted to ask about. Dad mentioned investments before he died. His face hardened. What specifically? Company transfers. Vendor payments.
Carson Hyde.
Daniel's face went slack for just a second before he recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. No. I pulled a folded paper from my pocket, a copy of one damning transfer record. It's interesting how money moves, isn't it?
Almost like magic. Here a minute, gone the next.
Like Dad. Where did you get that? Daniel's voice had dropped dangerously low. The same place I got everything else. I matched his stare.
You know what you did, Daniel.
Script part separator ===. He crossed the room with frightening speed, snatching the paper from my hands. His face was transformed, the mask of civility completely gone. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he hissed. None.
Isso todo my ground.
I know you embezzled millions from Dad's company. I know you met with Carson Reed to obtain something to accelerate Dad's heart condition. I know you replaced Dad's real will with a forgery. His laugh was cold, humorless. And who's going to believe you? The emotional schoolteacher who just lost Daddy's inheritance? You always were pathetically desperate for attention.
The police might believe the evidence.
Dad's private investigator collected quite a file.
Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with bruising force. Where is it? Where is the evidence? Somewhere ULL never find it.
I twisted away from him, along with the real will. His eyes darted around the room as though searching for hidden cameras.
You're bluffing.
Am I? The toxicology report shows traces of a compound in Dad's system. The same one you discussed with Carson in texts Dad intercepted. Daniel's face drained of color. Then, with terrifying control, he straightened his tie and smiled coldly. You've always been a problem, Amanda. Dad wouldn't listen when I told him you were unstable. He reached into his pocket. I didn't want it to come to this, but you're clearly having some kind of breakdown.
The gleam of metal caught my eye, a syringe.
Heart problems run in families, you know, he said casually. Such a tragedy. 2 Mitchell family members, same condition, same week. Script part separator, I backed away, heart hammering against my ribs.
My phone, the recording suddenly felt miles away in my pocket.
I couldn't reach it without telegraphing my move. You won't get away with this, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. I already have, Amanda.
Daniel advance slowly, syringe at the red.
Poor thing. So distraught over Dad's death that your heart just gave out. I kept backing up until I felt the fireplace mantle behind me. Dad's heavy marble chess set sat within reach, the one he'd taught us both to play on. Our father loved you, I said, my hand sliding sideways. He would have forgiven the embezzlement if you'd just come clean.
Daniel's laugh was hollow.
Dad loved his precious reputation more than either of us. He was going to expose everything, ruin me. So you killed him. My fingers closed around the weighted king piece.
He protected what he built.
Daniel snapped. I grew this company while you were finger painting with 8-year-olds. As he lunged forward with the syringe, I swung the marble chess piece. It connected with his temple with a sickening crack. Daniel staggered, eyes wide with shock, then crumpled to the floor. The syringe clattered beside him, its contents leaking onto the hardwood.
Hands shaking, he pulled my phone from my pocket.
9/11, then Townsend. Within minutes, the house was swarming with police and paramedics. Daniel was handcuffed to a gurney, semi-conscious and concussed.
You recorded everything?
Townsend confirmed as officers collected the syringe for evidence. Everything, I nodded, watching as they carried my brother, this stranger, to the waiting ambulance. Script part separator, By the following afternoon, everything had changed. I sat across from Detective Rivera in the police station, watching as she reviewed the evidence we'd compiled. Ms. Mitchell, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've seen, she said, closing the folder. Your father was meticulous. He built his company on attention to detail, I replied, my voice hollow. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only grief in its wake. The district attorney is charging your brother with first-degree murder and financial fraud. With the evidence you provided and his attempted assault caught on camera, he's looking at life without parole. I nodded, unable to find satisfaction in this outcome. There were no winners here. We've also arrested Carson Reed, she continued. He's already talking, hoping for a deal. Edward Townsend entered the room, carrying a thick legal folder. The judge has authenticated your father's actual will and invalidated the forgery. The estate has been unfrozen and transferred to your control, as your father intended. And Daniel's offshore accounts? I asked. Frozen. We've recovered most of the embezzled funds, Detective Rivera confirmed. The company's finances can be restored. Later, standing on the courthouse steps after the preliminary hearing where Daniel had been denied bail, reporters shouted questions from behind police barricades. Ms. Mitchell, how does it feel knowing your brother killed your father for money? Will you keep the family business or sell it? Did you suspect your brother was capable of murder? I walked past them all, head high despite my breaking heart. Mom waited in the car, aged 10 years in 3 days, destroyed by the revelation that her son had murdered her husband. It's done, I told her, taking her trembling hand in mine. Is it ever really done, though? Mom whispered, staring through the windshield at nothing. 3 months later, I stood in my father's, now my office at Mitchell Construction headquarters. The company had survived, though not without scars. Some clients had fled during the scandal, others had stayed out of loyalty to Dad's memory. Every day brought new challenges, but also opportunities to rebuild something honorable from the ashes of betrayal. I'd hired a CEO with construction experience to handle daily operations while I focused on healing what had been broken: trust, relationships, reputations. The employees who'd remained deserved that much. Daniel's trial was set for spring. His defense team had attempted an insanity plea, but the evidence was too damning, too methodical for that to succeed. I hadn't visited him in jail, despite his repeated requests. Some bridges, once burned, leave nothing but smoke. Mom had moved to Arizona permanently, unable to face the memories or the community gossip. We spoke weekly, our conversations careful dances around the gaping wound in our family. The funeral home finally released Dad's personal effects, including his wedding ring and watch. I kept them in my desk drawer, sometimes holding them when difficult decisions needed making, as though his wisdom might somehow transfer through these objects he'd touched daily. As I packed up to leave that evening, I noticed an unmarked envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single photograph, Dad and me at my college graduation, both beaming with pride. Written on the back in his handwriting, "Remember who you are, not what happens to you." I traced his words, a sad smile forming. In the end, that was his true legacy, not the buildings he'd constructed or the wealth he'd accumulated, but the foundation of character he'd helped me build. A foundation strong enough to withstand even this. Some nights I still wake up replaying everything, wondering if I could have seen the signs earlier, saved him somehow. But then I remember what Dad always said about regret: it's a room with no doors. So instead, I move forward, honoring his memory by living with the integrity he valued, running the company with the fairness he believed in, and finding moments of joy despite everything we lost. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just reveal who others truly are, it shows you who you really are too. And sometimes, that's the greatest inheritance of all.